The discussion this morning is the start of a very deep examination of our topic for these sessions, and we'll pick that back up very soon. Before that, though, a word on solutions. One of the things that Ethics in Action is committed to is identifying the values and ethics needed to advance concrete actions in response to the challenges to sustainable and integral development. Jeff has is Jeff back? We have a few updates on many of the measures that have been identified in our prior sessions to provide to the group as a first step toward creating a thread and continuity around the problem-solving aspects of these discussions. The person who is giving that update from the UN is Jeff, but he now is not here. That would be great. Hi, Jeff. Could you please highlight some of the actions that have been taken on the UN side of things where the measures that we've discussed in prior sessions are concerned?
So, thank you. Sorry for being in the continuing conversation intensely outside. Let me say a word about the process. Each of our meetings, we are ending with specific action areas as tentative proposals. And then, depending on our particular responsibilities, of course, we will aim to move these forward. From my point of view, we're in a building process. So these are very complicated issues. They involve global diplomacy, mobilization of finance, mobilization of leadership communities. So we are not in a position in any event to self-implement. But the idea is that as a body of leaders and on the basis of deliberation, evidence, documentation, we're making specific proposals that we believe that we will put into action, some at least of what we're hoping to do. I view this as a process not to be rushed step by step. So I don't view that what we're doing from the beginning is as if we're implementing from the first moment. We're still getting to know each other and to build a community of insight over the process of 2.5 years that are scheduled. Nonetheless, the idea is not only to talk, the idea really is to move into action. And so the idea that Jackie has proposed that at each meeting we review where we stand, what we've said, how it's moving forward or not, I think is extremely valuable. So this is the first of those steps. Let me say a general word about our global situation. We're operating under the framework of Laudato Si and the Sustainable Development Goal Agenda 2030. And the Agenda 2030 is, of course, the UN framework, so this is the universal mandate. We have a new Secretary General who himself is just getting settled. He confirmed, I'm happy to say for me, and I hope for the group, for our benefit, he reconfirmed me as his special advisor on the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's a position that I held with Ban Ki-moon, and now continue to hold with Antonio Guterres. Antonio Guterres is thoroughly committed. He's a very experienced politician. He's a wonderful human being, and he is our friend and supporter in the Sustainable Development Goals. One of his first actions was to nominate Amina Mohammed, who is also a very good friend and colleague for many of us for many years, as the Deputy Secretary General of the UN. Amina Mohammed has been a member of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. She's been one of the co-chairs. So that's our sponsoring group from the UN side. She was a co-chair of that. She went home to become Minister of Environment of Nigeria. And then Antonio, Secretary General, invited her back as Deputy Secretary General. This is also to say we could not have a closer friend and colleague in this work. She's extremely strong and was a negotiator of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now is the designated implementer for the Secretary General. So this is a second very powerful piece of our puzzle. A third is the key leadership on development in the UN is organizationally held at the UN Development Program. And Secretary General Guterres has appointed Achim Steiner as the new director of UNDP. Achim Steiner is, in my view, the ideal pick in the world for this position, which is saying a lot. He was the head of the UN Environment Program for many, many years. He is an environmentalist and a development specialist, extremely capable, Brazilian-born, German descent, bridging Germany and Brazil for his whole career, a great and effective UN leader. And then he finished his term as head of UN Environment Program and became dean at Oxford of the St. Martin School of the 21st Century. And then about a month later, Secretary General called him and said, you have to come back to New York to head UNDP because you're such an obvious, in fact, I would say unique choice for this. And he said, oh, I just accepted dean. So the next phone call was from Chancellor Merkel, and that was enough. So he agreed to become head of UNDP. And I had breakfast with him, Sonia and I had breakfast with him last week in Oxford as he was packing his bags. He's wonderful. Could not be a better friend for us as well. So in this regard, I want to say that from the UN side, from the leadership perspective, we have as strong a connection and team and partnership as could be imagined, which is quite wonderful. Now, I would also say that they're just getting their feet on the ground, so this has not been a time for lots of institutional innovation. Well, that's not quite true. But for our agenda, it's basically been getting the team in place and getting Amina started, and the Secretary General is confronting the realities of the UN in this new political era, which is not simple, with the Trump administration, with threatened budget cuts, with a lot of tough talk, with the war issues. So this has not been an easy period for moving the substantive agenda. the Secretary General will give his first major talk this week on climate change, which will be at NYU later this week. So this will be his opening discussion on climate change coming up. I accompanied him to a meeting of the G20 foreign ministers in Bonn in February, and he presented the Sustainable Development Agenda and made a specific push on education and health as two major pillars, and put that on the agenda and asked Chancellor Merkel to help move that forward. I will be with Amina Mohammed at the African Union Summit in June, and then with the Secretary General at the G20 in July to try to move this forward. This, for me, is our context, at least my context, which is how to engage the UN side. So in that background, let me go through some of the things we've said and give a word about where we are on this. From the first meeting, which was on poverty, we talked about the need to establish a global fund for education. Gordon Brown is the UN Special Envoy on Education, former Prime Minister of the UK. And I'm working closely with Gordon Brown on moving an agenda forward for some kind of global fund. He's working on one piece of this, which is with the World Bank and the other multilateral development banks, and my side is on development aid. The difference is one is loans and one is aid. And I can tell you that I'm pushing this recommendation, and also in the name of our group pushing the recommendation. And there is good receptivity to it, but all initiatives right now are complicated for the reasons that I just mentioned. Perhaps one of the most interesting developments was last week or 2 weeks ago in Helsinki. I met with the prime minister's lead on this issue, and they agreed to the prime minister's office agreed to try to create a Nordic-wide initiative. At least Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland to put the global fund on the G20 agenda, and for them to contribute financially to the startup of it. So this is one way that this is going forward. I was in Jeddah last week. With my travel schedule, I've been everywhere in the last week. So I was in, and Donald Trump keeps following me around, by the way, because I was in Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Rome, and he kept showing up. So I don't know where, if he'll be in Prague this weekend, where we'll be, but in any event, the Islamic Development Bank is very keen to support the education initiative as well. So this was very, very good news, and there's an Islamic Solidarity Development Fund, and I met with the head of it, and he said, sign us up, we will be big supporters of this. This is Islamic finance, it's not grants, it's kind of a Sakot, it's called. It's a 30-year loan with zero interest and gradual repayment. And so we're going to try to incorporate the Nordic initiative, the multilateral development banks, the Islamic Development Bank, and others into a package where we can launch an education initiative. So just to say, it's moving forward. It's lots of pieces. Stay tuned. We're going to get there because this is absolutely essential. The second issue we agreed on was a recommendation to create an Isaiah fund or a Pope Paul VI fund to divert current military spending to finance development initiatives. Unfortunately, by the time this recommendation got to the White House, the sign was reversed. So they apparently read this as cut development aid to increase military spending. So we have to help the understanding of this. The current budget that was proposed yesterday, I have to say, this is not a political statement, it's an analytical statement. This is the worst budget ever submitted in modern U.S. history, by far. It's utterly, completely contemptible because it is designed to cut all help for the poor to finance military spending and tax cuts for the rich. And it's all on the surface. It's not disguised. It's just vulgar. And so this is a real fight. To my mind, it means that our recommendation is even more important. We've not taken action on it to try to publicize it or deepen it, but I do think the idea for the world public, cut military spending, increase development aid with the savings, is all the more urgent in the actual political context. And as I said, imagine if Saudi Arabia's funds, by the way, Saudi Arabia does not have a lot of spare funding right now. With oil prices at $47 a barrel, Saudi Arabia has a 10% of GDP budget deficit. Its future is not secure because we have to phase out hydrocarbon use in the next 30 years. And Saudi Arabia has no business spending $100 billion on arms right now, and the U.S. has no business enticing them to spend $100 billion on arms. And so our message is really, really timely. And maybe we can think about how to raise it publicly. We haven't raised it publicly, we just discussed it among ourselves. But I think the timeliness of it, that we're moving in the wrong direction, we need to move in Isaiah's direction, is really important and appropriate right now, and now straightforwardly in front of us. Imagine if that $100 billion that the kingdom is proposing to spend were used on development in the Middle East. $100 billion would go pretty far. And so maybe we can make an appeal, actually, that this is a wrong-headed approach, it's dangerous, it can only lead to an arms spiral, and exactly what to do if there's $100 billion of available cash is to solve human problems right now on a regional scale that are quite urgent, is something that we could take up. A third area that we talked about is taxing wealth, especially in the tax havens. And this has been taken up in a significant campaign by many international NGOs, especially Oxfam. And I think there's mileage on this because there are $20 trillion sitting in tax havens right now. And this leads also to the question, the next point we mentioned, which is a global fund endowed by the world's billionaires. Last time I reported 1,826 billionaires with $7 trillion of net worth. Forbes just came out with its new issue this month. Billionaires are doing very well. So now the number is 2,043 billionaires on the list. That's up by 200 in 1 year, 10%. And the net worth is now $7.7 trillion. This is very important for us because $7.7 trillion, even a modest fraction of that, addressed to human needs would fund the solutions. I do believe we could make an approach to this list of people, and should, in a non-invidious way, in a very serious way. Most of the people on the list you've never heard of, and they've never heard from us, and they've never been involved in philanthropy. So there is a world of vast, vast net worth where people, I am sure, would welcome the opportunity to find real meaning and value in their wealth. Much of this wealth is first-generation wealth. Much of it is vastly beyond anything that these households and families could have ever expected. Much of it is among well-meaning people who are not asked to contribute, who are not the top 5 or 10 names on the list, not Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, but are 2,000 people who could make a vast difference. So this is something that I think we could operationally consider, and I would like to put that on the table, because I think the possibility of really moving not just as a headline, but as an initiative called by world religious leaders to say that the world is hurting and that this is a real opportunity and a practical opportunity, I think is extremely important and timely. Let me turn to the second area. Our second meeting was on religion and peace. And maybe Bill could also add a few words on this. But we said that we would request the UN Secretary General to put the issue of religion and peace on the UN Security Council agenda. I've not done so. Maybe Bill could give us an update on that. We recommended the creation of an interreligious contact group for the Secretary General. I think that this is a wonderful idea. We also talked about, in the religious context, a push for the world free of nuclear weapons, as world leaders have called for. I think that this is extremely timely. The very, on the one side, what I would regard as a very positive development, the strong re-election of President Rouhani, which I think is a message of peace and a message of global cooperation, followed by the meeting in Riyadh, which I do not regard as a message of peace. I regard it as a message of division. Behooves us to step forward in some way on the issues with Iran, in the Middle East, the Sunni-Shia divide, and I think it makes it all the more timely, and that was one of our points for the second meeting. So I'm going to stop here, and I think Jackie's idea is a wonderful one for us. We will create a kind of flow chart. So we will have a spreadsheet, what we've said, where things are updated, and we'll update, and action items. Who's responsible? Who can follow up? Who can build on this? And then review this each meeting, because we're going to achieve many of these goals. And this way, we're going to have a management structure to achieve it. And if I might, I'd like Bill to add on the second agenda.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you. I think a key clarification for ourselves is that in the room there are many of us who are in action all the time. And so we're looking at this as compiling or augmenting or complementing the ongoing action that is represented in the room. I just mentioned, and I think that makes a different kind of accounting. I think we can responsibly recognize that our ongoing work is intersecting and valuably being assisted by being here together. I just mentioned on the first issue of, for example, of development, particularly extreme poverty, Cardinal John Onaiken and his colleague, the Sultan of Sokoto, convened religious leaders from across Africa on the issue of development and building partnerships with development. That sort of thing is dipping into the very substantive discussions that are going on here. The nuclear weapons is something that the religious leaders are seized with. We're actively working on that. And so I think it's important, I'm simply illustrating that there's a great inventory of work that's going on that's being nourished by this. Caritas is here, and so they're working day in and day out in country after country. Jeff, on the issue that was raised with regard to religion and the UN Secretary General, as you know and as others know, inside the UN system, there is a high representative for the Alliance of Civilizations, and somewhat under that party's mandate is the role of religion in the UN system. And so Nasser al-Nasser, the High Representative, has been briefed by me on the meetings that are taking place here, and there will be meetings with the Secretary General, and they're building on the meetings with the previous Secretary General. Ayatollah Damad met with the previous Secretary General. The current one is interested in exactly what was being discussed. Sheikh Hamza, your colleague and mentor, Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, was also meeting with...
Sorry. We need to go to the program.
Okay, fair enough.
We not can, because there are many people.
Okay, fair enough.
We need to study the question. We don't have too much time.
Thank you very much. I was simply quickly illustrating that there's work afoot, Bishop Sorondo, that's exactly pertinent to the action agenda we've set ourselves. Thank you.
I also can speak, but I don't want to speak about this because we need to go to the program.
No, I think that I appreciate that we've taken the moment to start the process, and I thank Jeff for your words and Bill, yours as well. I will be circling back with many of the folks who are here today when we get to that point in the agenda tomorrow on where we go from here in terms of actions from this particular session, and I'll stop there. Thanks.